My study was on how the sports drink affects endurance performance. A brief description of my study. The research was conducted to evaluate whether sports drinks can help athletes achieve an optimal level of endurance performance in comparison to consuming water. There were 8 participants studying sport and exercise science from the borough of Brent. They took part in the study, 7 males and 1 female. The participants were split into 2 groups and performed a 12-minute Cooper run. For the first day, on day 1 and both day 2, they consumed a placebo drink, which was water, and this was done on day 1, and on day 2 they consumed a sports drink. My hypothesis for this was that the sports drinks will have a positive impact on the distance covered in the field test, also known as more ground will be covered. The types of research that were used, that possibly could have been used, there are 3 types of research used to collect data when carrying out a study. There is quantitative data. This research collects numerical data, for example, recording a heart rate or measuring the distance. Qualitative data is research that collects non-numerical data, for example, survey and observations. And finally, mixed method research is research that combines both quantitative and qualitative principles and methods in the same study. Advantages of the different types of research. For quantitative, one advantage is that it can provide provides the objective and numerical data, which some people may seem as more credible because it's free from bias, and is also useful for researching in larger groups. However, disadvantage is that the findings of the data collected may be too general. This is because it often uses larger group sizes, which may result in less specific knowledge in comparison to examining a single sporting population. Another disadvantage is that it's more difficult to control external variables, for example diet, and this is due once again to large group sizes. Qualitative data, one advantage is that it helps the researcher to understand how or why a phenomenon occurs. And another advantage is that it tends to be more flexible and dynamic in design, which allows it to be easily adapted. This means that the researcher can respond to the needs or direction of the participants to explore a topic in a slightly different manner. In addition to this, if the results that are related to the study, if results are found that are related to the study during the research, the researcher can adapt the research to explore these needs further. However, a disadvantage is that it can be harder to generalize to a wider population because qualitative data often uses smaller group sizes. It's also more time consuming as data analysis and collection can be a longer process. For example, you'd have to listen, record and read each participant's answers during the study. And advantages of mixed research is that it can add insight or understanding in comparison to if they just use one method, it may limit them. Another strength is that by using the strength of one of the research can overcome the limitations for another. So the quantitative can help overcome the qualitative disadvantages because it is free from bias, whereas qualitative will provide more of an insight and understanding. This will help it provide stronger conclusions and findings. A disadvantage of mixed research is that it's time consuming because you have to analyze 2 different types of data, quantitative and qualitative, and is more expensive because different types or tools may be needed to carry out this study. For my research, I chose quantitative data because we were measuring the effects of the distance over the distance covered when a sports drink was consumed. comparisons of research approaches. For example, if you have quantitative and qualitative research, quantitative will, if my study was quantitative, I use the exporting example, self-talk and jumping performance. So if my approach was focusing on quantitative data, I would be focusing on the distance that athletes jumped. However, if I was using qualitative data, I would focus on the mentality and the psychological aspect of athletes during the jump. For example, how much motivation they had during the jump and how effective they found the self-talk for the jump. Quantitative versus mixed methods research. If my main focus was quantitative, once again, I'd be focusing on the distance that athletes jumped. However, mixed methods considers both areas of the study, quantitative and qualitative. If I was comparing qualitative versus mixed research, qualitative, if that was my main aim of the study, I would be focusing on the mentality and the psychological aspect of the athletes during the jump. However, once again, if I used mixed methods, I would be considering both areas of the study, which would be quantitative and qualitative. As I stated before, for the study, I chose quantitative because this method will allow me to compare the variables to establish a relationship between them. Types of research designs. There are 3 types of research designs used to collect data when carrying out a study. Experimental is used to study the cause and effect of a relationship. This manipulates the independent variable, the variable that is changed, and the dependent variable, the variable that is tested or measured. Comparative is used when a researcher is looking to compare the impact of variables out of their control. A comparative research design is used, I was repeating myself. And finally, longitudinal is used when a researcher is looking to examine the long-term effect of a particular independent variable, the variable that is changed, on a particular dependent variable, the variable that is tested or measured. My study consisted of experimental research, which I made repeatable. So I did a repeatable experimental research. I chose this because I wanted to understand and see the cause and effect of the relationships between sports drinks and endurance performance. Data collection. There are 3 types of data collected when carrying out a study. There's lab-based, field-based, and survey-based. Lab-based is within an internally controlled environment. Field-based is in an externally controlled environment. And survey-based is when you collect data through people's opinions, behaviour, and knowledge. This study, my study, consisted of field-based data collection. It was held in a 4G astro pitch. I chose this because the ecological validity, because the astroturf mimics the conditions of an endurance performance runner. Data analysis. There are 3 types of ways of analysing data. There's descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, and significant difference. Descriptive statistics uses mean, median, mode, and standard deviation. Inferential statistics assesses the relationship or differences between data sets, which is the independent t-test and the dependent t-test. A dependent t-test is used to assess whether a significant difference exists between 2 sets of related scores, whereas an independent t-test is used when you have 2 different groups and are trying to discover if the mean score of the 2 groups are considered to be significantly different. Significant difference, performing a t-test for a single study to obtain a single p-value. When there is a measurable difference between 2 groups that you're testing, you perform a t-test, which you'll obtain a single p-value, which is 0.05. If the value that you found is which is equal or less than 0.05, the result can be considered significantly different. However, if the value attained is greater than 0.05, it can be concluded that results are not significantly different. The results, the t-test, I used the t-test to determine the significant difference on endurance performance from consuming the two drinks, both the placebo, water, and the sports drink. The results are shown below. This includes the mean and the standard deviation of the variables. This will allow me to easily compare the results from the different conditions, which the different conditions are the heart rate and the distance covered. I'll give you a quick second to have a look at what the results show. Results. This relates, as you can see, the results show between the placebo and sports drinks there was a significant difference in relation to the study. However, there was no significant difference between the pre and post heart rate, but there was a significant difference in the distance covered. This relates to a previous study shown here, effects of the sport beverages on cardiovascular endurance of football players. This was done by Pan and Polar in 2015. The participants consisted of 48 male players aged 15 to 17. They completed a 9-minute Cooper run test, and the competitors were divided into two groups. The results show that there was no obvious difference between the two drinks regarding the cardiovascular endurance. And in comparison to my study, the outcomes are vastly different, because my study shows that when a sports drink is consumed, it increases the amount of distance that could be covered. Considering that the reason maybe for this is because my study was a popular sports drink for adolescents, which was the Lucozade drink, and my study was also more recent than the Pan and the Polar study, which was conducted in 2015. My evaluation, the results showed that when participants consumed the chosen sports drinks in comparison to water, they were able to cover more distance in the 12-minute Cooper run. This proves that sports drinks can help athletes run for longer periods of time without becoming tired or fatigued, because they are able to prevent dehydration and replace electrolytes which are lost through sweat, and also provide carbohydrates which enhances the glycogen storage, which will allow them to run for longer. The limitations hindering complete reliability and validity of my test is that it was a small sample size of participants, and the participants were not athletes, and the fact that on day 2 one of the participants forgot their PE kit, so that hindered it from being fully reliable and valid. One suggestion that I'd make to improve this is that if I had the resources, I would perform the VO2 max test instead, because this is a maximum aerobic test which is performed on a treadmill or cycle, which is attached to a machine that can analyze the air exhaled. This test will reveal both how much oxygen is used while exercising and how much oxygen is actually taken in. This will also aid in determining how much carbon dioxide is exhaled, allowing for me to see the point of fatigue or when they become tired or exhausted. This method of endurance is precise, helping to improve accuracy and reliability, therefore ensuring that validity of the study would be achieved. Thank you.